The CEO cruelly rejected his twin daughters born through surrogacy until a compassionate billionaire stepped up and made them his own. Two tiny heartbeats filled the delivery room, but only one man stepped forward when their biological father walked away, and in that moment, money couldn't buy what mattered most. Before we get deep into the story, please let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Hit subscribe if you're hooked in and ready to enjoy this story, because tomorrow I have another beautiful story to share with you, and I don't want you to miss it for anything. Now, let's get back to the story. The fluorescent lights of Mercy General's maternity ward cast everything in an unforgiving white glow, making the sweat on Jasmine Washington's dark skin glisten as another contraction gripped her body. She squeezed the metal bed rail, her knuckles pale against her brown fingers, and tried to focus on the breathing techniques she'd practiced for months. Just breathe. Almost over. Then you'll have fulfilled your part of the deal. The contract had been clear. Carry the babies to term, deliver them safely, walk away with enough money to finally get her nursing degree, and maybe even help her mama with the mortgage. Simple. Clean. Businesslike. Except nothing about this felt simple anymore. "How are we doing, Jasmine?" Dr. Martinez asked, her voice professionally warm as she checked the monitors displaying 2 steady heartbeats. "Both girls are looking perfect, strong and healthy." Girls. Jasmine had known for months, but hearing it again made her chest tighten in ways the contract hadn't prepared her for. She'd spent 9 months feeling the move, hiccup, respond to her voice when she sang softly in the evenings. Now they were about to meet the world, and she would become a stranger to them. "The intended father should be here soon," the nurse mentioned, glancing at the clock. Mr. Sterling's assistant confirmed he was en route. David Sterling, CEO of Sterling Enterprises, net worth north of $50 million, and the man who'd paid her $25,000 to be an incubator for his genetic legacy. Jasmine had only met him twice, once for the initial consultation, where he'd barely looked at her, treating her like a service provider rather than a person, and once for a mandatory check-in where he'd spent the entire time on his phone discussing quarterly projections. The door opened, and Jasmine expected to see David's sharp suit and colder eyes. Instead, a different man entered, tall, with graying temples and concerned brown eyes that immediately found hers. "I'm sorry, I think there's been a mistake," Dr. Martinez began, but the man raised a gentle hand. "Nathan Cross," he said simply, his voice carrying a warmth that filled the sterile room. "I'm a friend of Mr. Sterling's. He asked me to check on things." Jasmine frowned through another contraction. David Sterling didn't strike me as the type to have friends, especially ones who looked at pregnant women with actual human concern instead of calculating property values. "What do you think about Nathan's immediate presence at the hospital? Does something feel different about his energy compared to what we'd expect from David? Share your thoughts below." "Where is Mr. Sterling?" Jasmine managed between breaths. Nathan's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. "He's handling some business matters, but don't worry, everything's going to be fine." The way he said it made Jasmine study his face more carefully. There was something in his expression, a quiet intensity that suggested he knew more than he was saying. Before she could ask, another contraction hit, stronger than the others, and Dr. Martinez moved into position. "Looks like we're ready to meet these little ones," the doctor announced. "Jasmine, on the next contraction, I need you to push." Time blurred into a series of moments, the burning pressure, the encouraging voices, the overwhelming urge to bring these babies safely into the world. And then, suddenly, the room filled with the most beautiful sound Jasmine had ever heard, a tiny, indignant cry. "Baby A is here," Dr. Martinez announced, holding up a perfect, wrinkled little girl covered in the proof of her journey into existence. "She's beautiful, Jasmine." Jasmine's eyes filled with tears she hadn't expected. The contract had been clear about emotional boundaries, but nobody had warned her that seeing this tiny person she'd carried would feel like watching a piece of her soul take its first breath. "And here comes baby B," the doctor continued, as Jasmine pushed again, her body working on instinct and determination. The second cry joined the first, creating a symphony that made Nathan Cross step closer to the window, his hands clenched at his sides, as if he were fighting some internal battle. "Two healthy girls," Dr. Martinez announced, placing both babies on Jasmine's chest for just a moment before the nurses began their immediate care protocols. 8 pounds even for baby A, 7 pounds 12 ounces for baby B. Perfect APGAR scores. Jasmine looked down at the two tiny faces, their eyes squeezed shut, their little fists waving as if they were already fighting for their place in the world. For just a moment, she let herself imagine what it would be like to keep them, to watch them grow, to be the one they called Mama. But then reality crashed back. The contract, the money already spent on her mother's medical bills, the life she'd signed away before these babies even existed. "They're perfect," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. Nathan had moved closer, and when Jasmine looked up, she saw something unexpected in his eyes. Not the detached observation she'd expected from David's representative, but genuine emotion, as if these babies mattered to him in a way that went beyond business arrangements. "Yes," he said quietly, his voice rough with something that sounded like wonder. "They are." The nurses finished their initial assessments and wrapped each baby in soft, pink blankets. Baby A, the fighter who had arrived first, had a distinctive dimple in her chin and the longest eyelashes she had ever seen on a newborn. Baby B was slightly smaller, but seemed more alert, her dark eyes already trying to focus on the faces around her. "Mr. Sterling should be here soon to meet his daughters," Dr. Martinez said, making notes on her chart. "Everything went perfectly. You did beautifully, Jasmine." Nathan's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it. Whatever he read there made his expression darken considerably. "Excuse me," he said, stepping into the hallway. Through the slightly open door, he could hear him speaking in low, tense tones. "No, David, you can't just... They're your biological children. What do you mean, complications?" A chill ran down Jasmine's spine that had nothing to do with post-delivery exhaustion. She strained to hear more, but Nathan had moved further away. When he returned 5 minutes later, his face was carefully neutral, but his eyes held a storm. "Is everything all right?" she asked, though something deep in her gut already knew the answer. Nathan looked at the two sleeping babies in their hospital bassinet, then back at Jasmine. For a moment, he seemed to be weighing words, measuring the impact of what he was about to say. "Mr. Sterling," he began carefully, "has encountered some unexpected circumstances." The professional euphemism hung in the air like a threat. Jasmine had grown up in neighborhoods where people spoke in code when the truth was too harsh for direct words. She recognized the careful phrasing that meant someone was about to destroy your world while trying to sound reasonable about it. "What kind of circumstances?" she pressed, her voice steady despite the fear creeping up her throat.
Nathan's eyes flicked to the babies again, and Jasmine saw something fierce pass across his features. Protective, almost paternal. It was an expression she'd never seen from David Sterling during their brief interactions. "Perhaps we should wait until you've had some rest." "Tell me now," Jasmine interrupted, summoning the strength that had carried her through 9 months of pregnancy, through years of working double shifts to support her family, through every challenge life had thrown at a young black woman trying to build something better. "These are I carried them. I have a right to know." Nathan was quiet for a long moment, studying her face as if measuring her strength. Finally, he nodded. "David's wife found out about the surrogacy arrangement. She's threatening divorce proceedings that could cost him significantly more than he anticipated. His lawyers are advising him that taking custody of the babies would complicate his financial position." The words hit Jasmine like physical blows. He's rejecting them? He's claiming that certain medical anomalies make the babies unsuitable for his purposes. What medical anomalies? Dr. Martinez had overheard and stepped forward, her professional demeanor shifting to protective advocacy. I've examined these babies thoroughly. They're perfect. Nathan's expression grew grimmer. According to David's new legal position, the fact that the babies show more of their surrogate mother's ethnic characteristics than anticipated means they don't meet the specifications outlined in the contract. The room fell silent except for the soft beeping of monitors and the occasional baby sounds from the bassinet. Jasmine felt the words settle over her like ice water, the casual cruelty of reducing her children, his children, to failed specifications because they looked too much like her. "So what happens to them?" she whispered. Nathan looked at the babies again, and Jasmine saw his hands tremble slightly as he gripped the back of the visitor's chair. "There might be another option," he said quietly. The hospital room door opened with the kind of sharp efficiency that announced David Sterling's arrival before he even appeared. He strode in wearing a charcoal Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, his pale blue eyes scanning the room like a CEO surveying a quarterly report, clinical, detached, already calculating the bottom line. "Miss Washington," he said, with a brief nod in Jasmine's direction, not quite meeting her eyes. "Dr. Martinez." He didn't acknowledge Nathan at all, which struck Jasmine as odd, given that Nathan had claimed to be there at David's request. Instead, David moved directly to the bassinet where both babies lay sleeping, their tiny chests rising and falling in perfect rhythm. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe even disappointment. Jasmine watched him study the babies' features, their darker skin tone, the texture of their hair, the shape of their noses that clearly reflected her genetic contribution more prominently than his own pale features. "Are these the children?" he asked Dr. Martinez, his tone suggesting he was inquiring about defective merchandise. "Yes, both girls are healthy and—" "I can see what they are," David interrupted, his voice carrying that particular corporate coldness that Jasmine recognized from their previous meetings. He pulled out his phone and began typing rapidly. "I need to speak with my legal team." Nathan stepped forward. "David, maybe we should discuss this privately." "There's nothing to discuss." David's fingers moved across his phone screen with the efficiency of a man accustomed to dismantling people's lives through electronic communication. The contract clearly specifies that the children should reasonably resemble the genetic parents. These obviously don't meet that standard. The casual cruelty of his words hit the room like a physical force. Dr. Martinez's face flushed with professional outrage, but it was Jasmine who spoke first. "What exactly are you saying?" Her voice was steady, but Nathan could see her hands trembling slightly as they gripped the hospital blanket. David finally looked directly at her, and his expression held all the warmth of a corporate layoff notice. "I'm saying that these children don't meet the specifications outlined in our agreement. The darker skin tone, the features are clearly going to be problematic for my family situation." "Problematic?" Dr. Martinez stepped forward, her professional composure cracking. "Mr. Sterling, these are healthy, beautiful babies. There's nothing problematic about." "That's not your determination to make. I've invested considerable resources in this arrangement with specific expectations. When a contractor fails to deliver to specifications, there are consequences." He was talking about the babies, about Jasmine like they were failed construction projects. Nathan felt something dark and hot rising in his chest, a protective fury he hadn't experienced since his own daughter was young and someone had dared to hurt her feelings on a playground. "You're rejecting your own children," Nathan said quietly. Because they looked too much like their mother? David's laugh was sharp and humorless. They're not my children, Cross. They're products of a business arrangement that hasn't delivered what was promised. My wife has made it clear that bringing obviously mixed-race children into our family would create complications with her social circle and our family image. Jasmine felt each word like a slap. She'd known David Sterling was cold, but she hadn't anticipated this level of casual dehumanization. These weren't just babies to him. They were liabilities, mistakes, problems to be solved through legal maneuvering. "So what happens now?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer would break her heart. "The contract reverts all responsibility to you," David said, still typing on his phone. "My lawyers are already filing the necessary paperwork. You'll be responsible for all medical costs, ongoing care, and any legal fees associated with the arrangement. The payment you received is forfeit due to breach of specifications." The numbers hit Jasmine like a physical blow. $25,000, already spent on her mother's surgery and medications. Hospital bills that would easily reach 6 figures. Legal fees. 2 babies who would need everything from diapers to college funds. "I can't," she whispered. "I don't have—" "Not my problem," David interrupted, pocketing his phone. "You should have considered these possibilities before agreeing to carry children you couldn't properly provide for." Nathan watched Jasmine's face crumble as the full weight of abandonment settled over her. He saw her looking at the babies, these perfect, innocent lives who'd done nothing wrong except be born with the wrong skin color for their biological father's social aspirations. Something inside Nathan Cross broke open. He'd spent the last decade building his construction empire, accumulating wealth that he'd never been sure what to do with since his wife died and his own daughter grew up and moved to the other coast. He'd felt purposeless lately, going through the motions of success without anything meaningful to anchor it to.
But looking at these 2 tiny girls, who'd just been rejected like defective products, watching Jasmine's world collapse around her as she realized she couldn't provide for them, suddenly, Nathan knew exactly what his wealth was for. "Actually," Nathan said, his voice cutting through David's continued legal mutterings, "there's another option." Both David and Jasmine looked at him with surprise. Nathan moved closer to the bassinet, looking down at the 2 sleeping babies. Baby A had woken up and was staring at him with dark, alert eyes that seemed impossibly wise for someone only hours old. Baby B was still sleeping, but her tiny fist had worked free of her blanket and was curled near her face like she was already ready to fight the world. "I'll take them," Nathan said simply. The room went dead silent except for the soft beeping of medical equipment. "What?" David's voice carried sharp disbelief. "I said I'll take them." Nathan looked up, meeting David's pale eyes with steady determination. "I'll claim legal parenthood. I'll cover all medical expenses, legal fees, everything." "Nathan, you can't just—" David started. "Why not?" Nathan's voice grew stronger, more certain with each word. "You clearly don't want them. Jasmine can't afford to care for them. I can provide everything they need: money, stability, love." "You barely know these people," David protested. "This is insane." "What's insane," Nathan said, his voice carrying an edge of steel that made everyone in the room pay attention, "is a man who creates life and then rejects it because it doesn't match his aesthetic preferences." Jasmine was staring at Nathan like he just offered to move mountains for her. You would do that? For babies that aren't even yours?" Nathan looked down at the tiny girls again, and something fundamental shifted in his chest. Baby A was still watching him, and when he gently touched her little hand, her fingers automatically curled around his thumb with surprising strength. "They could be mine," he said quietly, "if you let them be." What do you think drives someone to make such a life-changing decision
in a single moment. Have you ever witnessed or experienced an instant that completely changed everything? Share your thoughts in the comments. Dr. Martinez found her voice first. Mr. Cross, this is a very generous offer, but the legal implications are complex. There would need to be documentation, background checks, home studies. I'll handle all of it, Nathan said, without taking his eyes off the babies. Whatever it takes. David was scrolling through his phone again, his corporate mind already calculating angles. Actually, this could work in everyone's favor. Cross has more money than I do, cleaner reputation, no messy divorce proceedings. The casual way David discussed disposing of his children made Nathan's jaw clench, but he forced himself to stay focused on the solution rather than his disgust. Jasmine, Nathan said gently, this would be your decision. I'm not trying to take anything from you. I'm just offering an alternative. Jasmine looked between Nathan and the babies, her mind spinning through impossible calculations. She'd carried these girls for 9 months, felt them move and grow, sung to them in quiet moments. The thought of never seeing them again felt like having her heart surgically removed. But what was the alternative? Poverty that would make their lives a struggle from day one? Debt that would bury the 3 of them? A future where she'd have to work so many hours just to survive that she'd barely see them anyway. Would I? She started, then stopped, afraid to hope. Would you what? Nathan prompted gently. Would I be able to see them? Be a part of their lives? Nathan considered this carefully. He could see the love in her eyes when she looked at the babies, the genuine care that David Sterling had never shown. I think, he said slowly, these girls are going to need all the love they can get, and it seems to me that you've already loved them longer than anyone else in this room. Tears started running down Jasmine's cheeks. You'd really want me to stay involved? Jasmine, you carried them, protected them, brought them safely into this world. As far as I'm concerned, you're already their family. I'm just asking to be family too. David made an impatient sound. If you're all done with this hallmark moment, I have lawyers waiting for my call. Cross, if you're serious about this, my legal team can have the paperwork transferred within hours. Clean break, no complications for anyone. No complications for you, Nathan corrected coldly. Don't pretend this is about anyone else's welfare. David shrugged, completely unbothered by the accusation. Business is business. At least this way the children end up with someone who can afford them. He moved toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Cross, once this paperwork goes through, don't expect any ongoing relationship. As far as I'm concerned, this entire situation never happened. That, Nathan said quietly, is the best news I've heard all day. After David left, the room felt lighter, despite the magnitude of what had just occurred. Nathan, Jasmine, and Dr. Martinez stood in the aftermath of a moment that had changed everything. Are you sure about this? Jasmine asked, her voice still thick with tears. Taking on 2 babies, all the expenses, the responsibility? You don't even know me. Nathan looked at the babies again. Baby B had woken up, and both girls were making soft baby sounds, tiny complaints about being hungry or needing attention. Normal baby needs that suddenly felt precious rather than burdensome. I know enough, he said. I know that you carried them for 9 months and just watched a man reject them for the color of their skin. I know you're crying because you love them, not because you're relieved to be free of them. I know David Sterling is the kind of man who creates life and abandons it when it's inconvenient. He paused, looking directly at Jasmine. And I know these girls deserve better than that. They deserve people who choose to love them, not people who see them as obligations or investments. Dr. Martinez stepped forward. Mr. Cross, this is a very generous offer, but the legal implications are complex. There would need to be documentation, background checks, home studies. I'll handle all of it, Nathan said, without taking his eyes off the babies, whatever it takes. The Jasmine covert quietly for a moment studying Nathan's face. Finally, she spoke. Why? It was a simple question that demanded a complex answer. Nathan thought about his empty house, his successful but purposeless business, the way he'd been drifting through life since his wife's death. He thought about his own daughter, grown and living across the country, pursuing her own dreams. But mostly, he thought about the moment baby A had gripped his thumb, the way baby B had seemed to study his faith with ancient wisdom, the protective fury that had risen in him when David Sterling casually discarded them. Because, he said simply, someone needs to love them, and I think I already do. The babies chose that moment to start crying in unison, hungry, tired, overwhelmed by their first day in a world that had already tried to reject them. Without thinking, Nathan moved to the bassinet and gently picked up baby A, supporting her tiny head the way he remembered from his own daughter's infancy decades ago.
Instantly she calmed, her crying fading to soft whimpers as she settled against his chest. Jasmine watched this with wonder, then carefully lifted baby B, who also quieted at the contact. "They like you," she said softly. "Yeah," Nathan said, feeling something tight in his chest loosen for the first time in years. "I like them too." Dr. Martinez smiled, the first genuine happiness she'd shown since the drama began. "Well then," she said briskly, "let's get started on the paperwork to make this official. These girls need to know who their real father is." 3 days later, Nathan Cross found himself in the law offices of Morrison, Klein & Associates, holding a sleeping baby girl while a room full of lawyers tried to untangle the legal knot that David Sterling's rejection had created. Baby A, who Jasmine had started calling Hope during their long conversations at the hospital, dozed peacefully against his shoulder, completely oblivious to the complex legal maneuvering that would determine her future. "The surrogacy contract is quite explicit," David's attorney, a sharp-featured woman named Patricia Kellerman, was saying. "My client has legitimate grounds for rejection based on the deviation from specified genetic characteristics." Nathan felt his jaw clench, but kept his voice level. "You're talking about rejecting children because they look like their mother." "We're talking about a contractual agreement that wasn't fulfilled to specifications," Kellerman replied coolly. "This isn't personal, it's legal." Nathan's attorney, James Morrison, a man Nathan had used for construction contracts but never family law, leaned forward. "Miss Kellerman, your client commissioned the creation of human beings, not custom furniture. The legal precedent for rejecting children based on racial characteristics is problematic, to say the least." Across the conference table, Jasmine sat holding baby B, who she'd named Faith, and trying to follow the legal complexities that would determine whether she'd have any ongoing relationship with the daughters she'd carried for 9 months. She'd been quiet for most of the meeting, but Nathan could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hand protectively curved around Faith's tiny body. "What exactly is Mr. Cross's legal standing here?" Kellerman asked. "He has no biological relationship to these children, no prior legal arrangement with Miss Washington, no established paternal rights." Morrison shuffled through his papers. "Mr. Cross is prepared to formally adopt both children and assume all legal and financial responsibility. Given Mr. Sterling's clear rejection and abandonment, this represents the most stable outcome for the children's welfare." "And what about Miss Washington's rights?" asked Elena Rodriguez, the attorney Nathan had hired specifically to represent Jasmine's interests. "She carried these children for 9 months. She has maternal bonds and potentially legal claims that supersede any surrogacy contract." The room fell silent as everyone considered the implications. Jasmine looked up from Faith's peaceful face, her dark eyes moving between the lawyers and finally settling on Nathan. "What do you want?" she asked him quietly. "Really, because I need to understand what I'm agreeing to." Nathan shifted hope slightly, feeling her tiny weight against his chest like an anchor to something real and meaningful. "I want to be their father," he said simply. "I want to give them everything they need: education, opportunities, love, and stability. I want them to know they're wanted and valued and protected." "And me," Jasmine's voice was barely above a whisper, "where do I fit in that picture?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implications none of them had fully worked through. Nathan had made his decision to claim the babies in a moment of protective fury, but the practical realities, the day-to-day responsibilities of raising twins, the complexities of sharing parental roles with Jasmine, the ways this decision would change every aspect of his carefully ordered life were just beginning to sink in. "Mr. Cross," Morrison said gently, "perhaps we should discuss your motivations and expectations more thoroughly. Adopting twins is a significant commitment, especially at your age and given your current lifestyle." Nathan bristled slightly. "My age? You're 58 years old. You've been single for 7 years. You work 60-hour weeks running a construction company. Are you prepared for midnight feedings, diaper changes, toddler tantrums, teenage drama? These children will need consistent, stable parenting for the next 19 to 20 years. The questions hit harder than Nathan wanted to admit. His own daughter, Rebecca, was 32 now and lived in Seattle with her own family. He had been a good father, but that was decades ago when he was younger and had his wife Sarah to share the responsibilities. Now he was successful, but essentially alone, structured around work schedules and business meetings that left little room for the chaos that came with children. "I know it won't be easy," Nathan said, but his voice carried less certainty than it had moments before. Jasmine was watching him carefully, and she could see her reading his growing uncertainty. "Maybe this was a mistake," she said quietly. "Maybe I should just—" "No," Nathan interrupted, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. "No, it wasn't a mistake." He looked down at Hope, who had woken up and was staring at him with those impossibly alert dark eyes. Something about her gaze steadied him, reminded him of the moment when everything had become clear. "You want to know my motivations?" he asked around the room. "My wife died 7 years ago. Cancer. My daughter lives 3,000 miles away. I built a successful business, accumulated more money than I know what to do with, and for what? So I could work until I die and leave it all to charity?" He paused, gently adjusting Hope's position. 3 days ago, I watched a man reject his own children because they didn't match his aesthetic preferences. I watched Jasmine's world collapse because she loved them too much to abandon them, but couldn't afford to keep them. And I realized that all my success, all my resources, all my carefully planned life, none of it meant anything if I couldn't use it to protect 2 innocent babies who deserved better. The room was quiet, except for the soft sounds of the babies and the distant hum of city traffic through the office windows. "So yes," Nathan continued, "I'm 58. Yes, I work too much. Yes, this will completely change my life in ways I probably can't even imagine yet. But these girls need someone to choose them, to commit to them, to love them unconditionally. And I want to be that person." Jasmine wiped tears from her eyes. "But what if it's too hard? What if you realize you can't handle it?" Nathan met her gaze directly. "Then I'll figure it out. I'll hire help. I'll change my schedule. I'll learn what I need to learn. But I won't abandon them. That's not who I am." "And me?" Jasmine asked again. "What if this gets complicated between us? What if we disagree about how to raise them?" "Then we'll work it out, like families do." The legal complexities are real, but so is the growing bond between these 3 people. Do you think unconventional families can work when built on genuine love and commitment? What challenges do you see ahead for Nathan and Jasmine? Share your thoughts below.
Elena Rodriguez had been taking notes throughout the conversation. "I think we can structure this," she said. "Joint legal guardianship with Mr. Cross as primary custodian, Ms. Washington a secondary guardian with specific rights and responsibilities. Clear financial arrangements, decision-making protocols, visitation schedules." "It's still risky," Morrison warned, "legally and emotionally. You're essentially creating a family structure with no biological or traditional legal foundation." "Some of the strongest families I know," Nathan said, "are built on choice rather than biology." Kellerman gathered her papers with obvious disapproval. "My client wants a clean break. No ongoing complications, no future claims. If Mr. Cross wants to adopt these children and Miss Washington agrees to relinquish her rights, Mr. Sterling will sign off on the arrangement." "I'm not relinquishing my rights," Jasmine said firmly. "I'm sharing them." Nathan felt something warm and strong settle in his chest at her words. Not relinquishing, sharing, building something together rather than transferring ownership. "Then we'll need a more complex agreement," Rodriguez said. "But it's doable. The children's welfare is the primary consideration, and this arrangement clearly serves their best interests better than abandonment or poverty." As the lawyers began discussing procedural details, Nathan found himself studying Jasmine's face as she gazed down at Faith. There was love there, fierce and protective, but also fear. She was taking a leap of faith just as significant as his own, trusting a man she barely knew with the children she had carried and loved, believing that this unconventional arrangement could somehow work. "Jasmine," he said quietly, while the lawyers debated filing procedures, "are you sure about this? Really sure? Because once we start down this path, I want us all to be committed to making it work." She looked up at him, and for a moment she saw the young woman behind the strength, someone who'd faced challenges that would have broken many people, who'd made impossible choices to survive and support her family, who was now gambling her heart on the hope that love could transcend legal contracts and social conventions. "I'm sure," she said simply. "These girls deserve everything we can give them, together." Nathan nodded, feeling the weight of commitment settle over him like a mantle. Together. But even as they made their promises, both Nathan and Jasmine were thinking about the challenges ahead, the sleepless nights and demanding schedules, the questions about their unconventional arrangement from family, friends, and society, the ways that sharing parenthood with someone you barely knew could create conflicts and complications neither of them had anticipated. Most of all, they were both wondering if love and good intentions would be enough to hold together a family built on crisis rather than tradition, hope rather than biology, choice rather than chance. Outside the conference room windows, the city hummed with its usual rhythms of ambition and struggle. Hope and faith slept peacefully in their arms, blissfully unaware that their futures were being negotiated by lawyers and shaped by the impulsive decisions of adults who were trying to do the right thing without knowing what that might cost them. The papers would be filed, the arrangements would be formalized. The real test would begin when they left the office and started the complicated work of becoming a family. But for now, in this moment of legal complexity and emotional uncertainty, two babies were safe and wanted and loved. And sometimes, Nathan thought, as he watched Hope's peaceful face, that was enough to build everything else on.
6 weeks later, Nathan Cross was learning that love didn't make 3 a.m. feedings any easier. He stood in the nursery he'd hastily assembled in his Beacon Hill townhouse, gently bouncing Hope while Faith dozed in her crib nearby. The soft glow of the nightlight cast everything in warm amber tones, making the chaos of his transformed life feel almost peaceful. Almost. Hope had been fussy for the past hour, not hungry, not wet, just unsettled in the way that reminded Nathan why people had children when they were younger and had more energy. His back ached from the rocking motion, his eyes burned with exhaustion, and he had a 7 a.m. conference call with contractors that he'd probably have to reschedule again.
But when Hope finally settled against his chest with a soft sigh, her tiny fist gripping his pajama shirt, Nathan felt that familiar rush of fierce protectiveness that had become the strongest emotion in his carefully ordered world. "That's my girl," he whispered, carefully placing her back in her crib next to her sister. "Sleep now. Daddy's got everything handled." Daddy. The word still felt new on his tongue, but less strange every day. Hope and faith had been part of his life for 6 weeks, and already he couldn't imagine it any other way. His phone buzzed on the dresser, a text from Jasmine. "How are they tonight? I can come over if you need help." Nathan smiled as he typed back. "All good. Hope was restless, but she's down now. Get some sleep." "You sure? I don't mind." "I'm sure. See you tomorrow afternoon." The arrangement they'd worked out was functioning better than anyone had expected. Jasmine came by every afternoon after her nursing classes, spending several hours with the girls while Nathan handled business calls and caught up on sleep. Weekends, she often stayed over in the guest room, giving Nathan some backup during the challenging nights and ensuring the babies had consistent bonding time with both of their chosen parents. It wasn't traditional, but it was working. The girls were thriving, Jasmine was excelling in her accelerated nursing program that Nathan's financial support had made possible, and Nathan was discovering that fatherhood the second time around brought joys he'd forgotten and challenges he was determined to meet, which made the phone call he received the next morning all the more jarring. "Mr. Cross?" The voice was crisp, professional, unfamiliar. "This is Jennifer Walsh from Sterling Enterprises Legal Department. Mr. Sterling would like to schedule a meeting with you regarding the custody arrangement for Hope and Faith Sterling."
Nathan paused in the middle of making coffee, the babies visible through the kitchen doorway in their bouncy seats. "I'm sorry, what did you call them?" "Hope and Faith Sterling, Mr. Sterling's daughters." "There must be some mistake," Nathan said carefully. "David Sterling legally relinquished all parental rights 6 weeks ago. The adoption was finalized. Their legal names are Hope and Faith Cross." "Actually, Mr. Cross, that's what Mr. Sterling would like to discuss. There may have been some irregularities in the original proceedings that need to be addressed." Nathan felt ice form in his stomach. "What kind of irregularities?" "I think it would be best if Mr. Sterling explained the situation in person. Would this afternoon be convenient?" "No," Nathan said immediately. "Whatever David Sterling has to say, he can say through my attorney. Mr. Cross, I understand your caution, but Mr. Sterling is hoping to resolve this matter amicably. He's prepared to make a very generous offer that would benefit everyone involved." The word offer hung in the air like a threat. Nathan looked at Hope and Faith, who were contentedly playing with the colorful toys attached to their seats, completely unaware that their stability was apparently under attack. "I'm sorry. I'll call you back." Nathan ended the call without waiting for a response. 20 minutes later, he was on the phone with James Morrison while watching the babies and trying to keep his voice calm. "They can't just undo a legal adoption," Morrison said, but he could hear uncertainty in his voice. "The paperwork was thorough. David's abandonment was documented. The girls' welfare was clearly served by the arrangement." "But," Nathan prompted, "but David Sterling has resources and connections that most people don't. If he's found some legal technicality or procedural issue, he might be able to create complications." "What kind of complications?" Morrison was quiet for a moment. "The kind that could drag this through courts for months or years, while the children's futures remain uncertain." Nathan felt something cold and furious rising in his chest. "He can't have them back. Morrison, I don't care what it cost or how long it takes. He abandoned them. He rejected them. They're my daughters now." "Nathan, I understand your position, but we need to be practical. Sterling has more money than God and lawyers who specialize in finding loopholes. If he's decided he wants the children back, why would he want them back? 6 weeks ago, he rejected them because they looked too much like Jasmine. What's changed?" As he asked the question, Nathan suspected he knew the answer. Over the past month, several business publications had run profiles on his construction company's expansion into green technology. Forbes had estimated his net worth at significantly higher than previous assessments. David Sterling was exactly the kind of man who paid attention to such things. The doorbell rang, interrupting his dark thoughts. Through the front window, Nathan could see Jasmine on his doorstep, but something about her posture looked wrong, tense, worried. "Morrison, I'll call you back." Nathan ended the call and opened the door. Jasmine stepped inside quickly, her nursing school bag clutched tightly in her hand. "Nathan, we need to talk. I got a call this morning." "From Sterling's lawyers? You got one too?" Relief and worry warred in her expression. What did they want? Nathan led her into the living room where they could see the babies while they talked. "To discuss irregularities in the adoption." "You?" "They asked me to come in for a meeting, said there might be financial compensation available if I was willing to reconsider certain aspects of the arrangement." They stared at each other as the implications sank in. David Sterling wasn't just challenging the adoption, he was trying to buy Jasmine's cooperation. "What do you think he really wants?" Jasmine asked quietly. Nathan looked at Hope and Faith, who were contentedly playing with the colorful toys attached to their seats, completely unaware that their stability was apparently under attack. "I think," Nathan said slowly, "that David Sterling has realized I'm worth more money than he initially calculated, and I think his wife's social objections to mixed-race children might be less important than the financial advantages of controlling children who now have a very wealthy adopted father." Jasmine sank into the armchair Nathan had bought specifically for nighttime feedings. "So this isn't about wanting to be a father. This is about money." It's always been about money for him. The surrogacy was about getting heirs without emotional complications. Rejecting them was about avoiding financial complications from his divorce. And now claiming them back is probably about controlling access to my resources or positioning himself to benefit from my relationship with them. The cruelty of it, using children as financial instruments, made Nathan's hands clench into fists. But beneath the anger was something sharper and more dangerous: fear. Fear that David's money and connections might be enough to tear apart the family they'd been building. Fear that Hope and Faith might become pawns in a legal battle they were too young to understand, but would suffer the consequences of for years. "What do we do?" Jasmine asked. Before Nathan could answer, his phone rang again. This time the caller ID showed David Sterling's name directly. Nathan looked at Jasmine, who nodded grimly. He answered on speaker. "David, I think we need to talk. I think we said everything we needed to say 6 weeks ago when you walked out of that hospital room." David's laugh was cold and calculating. "Circumstances change. New information comes to light. I've been reviewing the adoption paperwork, and it seems there may have been some irregularities that could validate the entire arrangement." "Such as?" "The psychological evaluations weren't completed to state standards. The home study was rushed. Most importantly, Miss Washington may not have had adequate legal representation when she agreed to relinquish her parental rights." Nathan's jaw clenched. Jasmine had her own attorney. Elena Rodriguez represented her interest throughout the process. "An attorney, I've since learned, has a professional relationship with your lawyer Morrison, potential conflict of interest, which could call into question whether Miss Washington's rights were adequately protected." The legal maneuvering was sophisticated and ugly, designed to find technicalities that could unravel everything they'd built. Nathan looked at Jasmine, who had gone pale as she realized her own legal representation might be used against their family. "What do you want, David?" "I want what's best for my biological children, and I think what's best is for them to be raised by their biological father in a stable, traditional family environment." "You mean the same stable, traditional family environment you were protecting when you rejected them 6 weeks ago?" "I was hasty," David said smoothly. "I let personal stress cloud my judgment. But I've had time to reconsider, and I realize these children deserve to know their biological heritage. They're not bargaining chips, David. They're not business assets. They're children who need love and stability, not whatever game you're playing. Actually, Nathan, they're my children, biologically and legally, once these irregularities are corrected. And I'm prepared to be quite generous in acknowledging your contribution to their care during this transitional period. Meaning, I'm prepared to offer you a substantial fee for the time and resources you've invested. Call it a finder's fee for ensuring their welfare until I could resume my parental responsibilities."
The casual cruelty of reducing his love for Hope and Faith to a finder's fee made Nathan see red.
But before he could respond, Jasmine spoke up. "And what about me?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "What's my role in your generous offer?" "Miss Washington, you've exceeded the terms of our original surrogacy agreement by maintaining contact with the children. I'm prepared to offer additional compensation in exchange for a clean break that allows my daughters to bond properly with their biological father." Have you ever seen someone try to treat human relationships like business transactions? How do you think real love and commitment stand up against legal manipulation and financial pressure? Let us know in the comments. Nathan looked at Jasmine and saw her staring at the babies with the expression of someone watching her world crumble. Hope had rolled onto her side and was reaching for Faith, their tiny hands almost touching in a gesture that seemed to symbolize everything innocent and pure that David Sterling was trying to destroy. "Here's my counteroffer," Nathan said, his voice deadly quiet. "Go to hell." "Nathan, be reasonable. I have the resources to drag this through courts for years. The children's futures will remain uncertain, their stability compromised, their care disrupted by ongoing legal battles. Is that really what you want for them?" "What I want," Nathan said, standing up and moving closer to the babies, "is for them to grow up knowing they're loved unconditionally by people who chose them, not people who see them as financial opportunities." "Sentiment is admirable, Nathan, but it doesn't change legal realities. I'll give you 48 hours to consider my offer. After that, my attorneys will begin proceedings to challenge the adoption and reclaim custody of my daughters." The line went dead. Nathan and Jasmine sat in silence for a moment, watching Hope and Faith play together on their blanket, oblivious to the storm gathering around them. "He can't actually take them, can he?" Jasmine whispered. Nathan knelt beside the babies, gently smoothing Hope's dark hair, while Faith grabbed at his finger with surprising strength. These were his daughters in every way that mattered. He'd been there for every feeding, every diaper change, every milestone. He'd rearranged his entire life around their needs and discovered that fatherhood was the most important work he'd ever done. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I know this. I'm not giving up without a fight. Whatever it takes, however long it takes, how much it costs, they belong with us." Jasmine reached over and took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his as they both watched their daughters. "Together?" "Together," Nathan confirmed, feeling the weight of commitment settle over them both like armor. David Sterling thinks everything has a price. He's about to learn that some things can't be bought. But even as he made the promise, Nathan could feel the uncertainty eating at him. David had resources and connections that most people couldn't fight. The legal system often favored biological parents over adoptive ones. And the next 48 hours would determine whether love and choice were enough to protect the family they'd built from a man who saw children as assets to be acquired and discarded at will. Hope and Faith babbled softly to each other, their innocent sounds filling a room that suddenly felt like a fortress under siege. Outside, the world went on as usual, unaware that two 6-week-old babies had become the center of a battle between two very different definitions of what it meant to be a father. The real fight was just beginning. 47 hours later, Nathan Cross sat in Judge Martha Henley's courtroom holding a manila folder that he hoped contained the key to keeping his family together. Beside him, Jasmine clutched a similar folder, her nursing school textbooks forgotten for the week as they'd worked around the clock with their legal team to prepare for David Sterling's custody challenge. Hope and Faith weren't in the courtroom. At 8 weeks old, they were too young for the legal proceedings that would determine their futures. Instead, they were with Nathan's daughter, Rebecca, who had flown in from Seattle the moment she heard about the crisis threatening her new baby sisters. "I can't believe someone would do this," Rebecca had said when Nathan explained the situation. "Dad, those babies are lucky to have you. And Jasmine seems incredible. Don't let that man tear apart what you've built." The support from his adult daughter had strengthened his resolve, but it was the contents of the folders that gave him real hope. Judge Henley called the emergency custody hearing to order, her gray eyes stern as she surveyed the packed courtroom. David Sterling sat at the plaintiff's table with 3 expensive lawyers, his expression confident despite the media attention his custody grab had attracted. Several journalists sat in the gallery. The story of a billionaire trying to reclaim children he'd rejected for racial reasons had captured public interest in ways that made David's usual media control impossible. "Mr. Sterling," Judge Henley began, "you're requesting emergency custody of 2 infants you legally relinquished 6 weeks ago. Please explain to the court why this drastic action is in the children's best interests." David's lead attorney, Patricia Kellerman, stood smoothly. "Your Honor, my client made a hasty decision during a period of personal crisis. Upon reflection and consultation with family counselors, he realizes these children deserve to be raised by their biological father in a stable, traditional family environment." And what's changed about Mr. Sterling's circumstances that makes him suddenly capable of providing this stability? "My client has resolved his personal difficulties and is prepared to provide significant resources for the children's welfare. Moreover, we've discovered irregularities in the adoption process that may have violated Miss Washington's parental rights." Nathan felt his jaw clench as Kellerman outlined their legal challenges: the rushed paperwork, the potential conflict of interest, the argument that Jasmine hadn't been adequately protected during the relinquishment process. When it was time for Nathan to testify about his daily care for the babies, his love for them seemed to fill the courtroom. "Your Honor, I'm not a rich man like Mr. Sterling, but I can tell you this. I love these children more than anything in this world. I promise to protect them, and I will not break that promise." When Henley asked Nathan's attorney for his evidence, Morrison opened his folder and pulled out a stack of documents. Phone records showing that Mr. Sterling's first contact with his lawyers about reclaiming the children occurred within 24 hours of Forbes publishing their updated assessment of Mr. Cross's wealth. Financial records showing that Mr. Sterling's company has suffered significant losses in recent months. And most damning, a recorded conversation from this morning.
Nathan felt his heart rate spike. They'd taken a significant risk getting this evidence, but Elena Rodriguez had connections with investigative journalists who specialized in corporate corruption. "Your Honor," Morrison continued, "Mr. Sterling doesn't know that his wife contacted a reporter yesterday thinking she was speaking to a potential investor. We have her stating explicitly that David sees the children as potential access to Cross Construction's green technology contracts, and that David thinks having Cross as family could be worth millions in future business deals." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. David's face went pale as he realized his careful legal strategy was collapsing around him. Judge Henley called for order. "Mr. Sterling, is it true that your renewed interest in these children is financially motivated?" Kellerman tried to object, but David was already standing. His corporate instincts, so effective in boardrooms, failed him completely in the face of public exposure and legal scrutiny. "Your Honor, my personal motivations are irrelevant. These are my biological children, and I have rights. Rights you voluntarily relinquished, rights you abandoned when you rejected these children based on their racial characteristics, rights that don't automatically restore themselves when your financial calculations change." Nathan felt a surge of hope, but Morrison wasn't finished. "Your Honor, we also have testimony from hospital staff who witnessed Mr. Sterling's rejection of the children. Dr. Martinez is prepared to testify that Mr. Sterling explicitly stated the babies were unsuitable because of their ethnic appearance." Morrison pulled out another document, and we have evidence that Mr. Sterling's wife has been calling their social circle trying to determine whether mixed-race grandchildren would affect David's country club memberships. The casual racism revealed in the evidence hung over the courtroom like a toxic cloud. Nathan looked at Jasmine, who was staring at David with an expression of disgust that probably reflected what most people in the room were feeling. But it was Jasmine herself who delivered the most powerful testimony.
When called to the witness stand, she spoke with quiet dignity about carrying hope and faith for 9 months, about the love she'd felt for them from the moment she knew they existed, about watching David Sterling reject them in the hospital room like they were defective products. "Your Honor," she said, her voice steady and strong, "I chose Mr. Cross to help me raise these girls because he saw them as miracles, not mistakes. Because he stepped forward when their biological father walked away. Because he loves them for who they are, not what they might be worth to him." She paused, looking directly at David. "These babies deserve parents who choose them every day, not parents who see them as business opportunities." When Nathan took the stand, he spoke about the past 8 weeks, the sleepless nights, the first smiles, the way that hope and faith had already begun to develop distinct personalities. He talked about rearranging his entire life around their needs and discovering that fatherhood was the most important work he'd ever done. "Your Honor," Nathan concluded, "Mr. Sterling is right that biology matters, but biology isn't just DNA, it's about who shows up. Who feeds them at 3 a.m., who stays when things get difficult, who loves them unconditionally, not because of what they can provide in return." Judge Henley deliberated only 20 minutes. "In my 30 years on this bench, I've seen many custody disputes, but I've rarely seen a case where the biological parents' motivations were so clearly contrary to the children's welfare." She looked directly at David Sterling. "Mr. Sterling, you rejected these children for racial reasons, abandoned them completely for 8 weeks, and now seek to reclaim them for financial gain. This court finds your petition not only without merit, but actively harmful to the children's interests." Nathan felt Jasmine's hand find his as Judge Henley continued. "Mr. Cross and Ms. Washington have demonstrated consistent, loving care for these children. They've created a stable, nurturing environment that serves the children's welfare far better than the transactional relationship Mr. Sterling is proposing." She paused, her expression stern. "Furthermore, this court is disturbed by evidence of racial discrimination in Mr. Sterling's decision-making. Using children's ethnic characteristics as grounds for rejection is not only morally reprehensible, but potentially criminal under federal civil rights statutes." David's confident expression had completely crumbled. His lawyers were frantically taking notes, probably already calculating their next moves and damage control strategies. "Therefore," Judge Henley concluded, "Mr. Sterling's petition for custody is denied. The existing adoption is valid and permanent. Additionally, this court is issuing a restraining order preventing Mr. Sterling from contacting these children or their parents for any reason." The courtroom erupted in applause and cheers from the spectators who had followed the case. Nathan felt Jasmine's hand find his as Jasmine threw her arms around him in a fierce hug. But Judge Henley wasn't finished. "Mr. Sterling, this court is also referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation of potential civil rights violations. Using racial characteristics to discriminate against children may constitute criminal behavior under federal law." David Sterling, the man who had casually tried to destroy their family for financial gain, looked like he was about to be sick. His lawyers were already escorting him toward the exit as reporters shouted questions about racial discrimination and corruption. "What do you think about justice being served when powerful people try to manipulate the system for personal gain? Have you seen situations where love and commitment triumphed over money and legal manipulation? Share your thoughts about what really makes a family in the comments below." An hour later, Nathan and Jasmine stood in Nathan's living room, watching Hope and Faith play on their blanket, while Rebecca bounced baby Faith gently in her arms. "I can't believe it's over," Jasmine said, still seeming stunned by their victory. "It's not just over," Nathan said, settling onto the floor next to Hope, who immediately reached for his finger with her characteristic determination. "It's permanent. No more challenges, no more uncertainty. They're ours." Rebecca smiled at them from across the room. Dad, I have to say, I was worried when you first told me about this, not because I doubted your ability to be a father again, but because the situation seemed so complicated. She looked at Jasmine, who was now sitting cross-legged on the floor, letting Faith grab at her hair. But watching you two together, seeing how you've created this family, it's beautiful. Hope and Faith are lucky to have both of you. Nathan felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with winning the legal battle. Over the past 8 weeks, Nathan and Jasmine had developed a partnership that went beyond their shared love for the babies. They'd learned to communicate about everything from feeding schedules to future plans. They'd supported each other through the exhaustion and stress of new parenthood. They'd created routines and traditions that made their unconventional family feel natural and right. "What happens now?" Jasmine asked. "I mean, we've been so focused on fighting David's challenge that we haven't really talked about the future."
Nathan looked at Hope and Faith, who were now both reaching for each other across the small space between them on the blanket. 8 weeks old and already inseparable, already demonstrating the bond that had convinced him from the beginning that they belonged together. "Now, we raise them," he said simply. "We love them, we protect them, we give them everything they need to become amazing women." "Together?" Jasmine asked, and Nathan heard the hope in her voice, mixed with uncertainty. "Together," Nathan confirmed. "Whatever that looks like, whatever challenges come up, whatever adjustments we need to make, we're family now. All of us." Rebecca made a soft sound of approval. "You know, Dad, I always wondered if you'd find your way to happiness again after Mom died. I'm glad it came in such an unexpected package." Nathan looked around the room at his adult daughter holding one of his new daughters, at Jasmine gently tickling Faith's feet while Hope babbled contentedly nearby, at the toys and baby equipment that had transformed his orderly bachelor existence into something chaotic and wonderful. "You know what the strangest part is?" he said. "David Sterling thought he was taking something from me, but he actually gave me everything I didn't know I needed." 6 months later, Hope and Faith crossed Washington. They legally hyphenated the names to honor both their chosen parents, celebrated their first Christmas in Nathan's living room, which had been completely reorganized around baby-proofing and comfort. The tree was smaller than Nathan's usual elegant display, covered with baby-safe ornaments and surrounded by enough wrapped presents to supply a small toy store. Jasmine had moved into the guest room permanently 3 months earlier, when juggling 2 households became too complicated with teething babies and demanding nursing school schedules. What had started as a practical arrangement had evolved into something deeper, a true partnership built on shared responsibility and genuine affection. Nathan sat on the floor watching Hope attempt to crawl toward a wrapped present, while Faith contentedly explored the fascinating texture of wrapping paper. At 8 months old, both girls were developing personalities that delighted and amazed him daily. Hope was the adventurer, always trying to reach whatever was just beyond her grasp. Faith was the observer, content to study things carefully before deciding whether they were worth her attention. "They're going to be into everything soon," Jasmine said, settling beside him with 2 cups of coffee. "Are you ready for mobile babies?" "Are parents ever ready for mobile babies?" Nathan asked, accepting the coffee gratefully. "But I figure we'll adapt. We always do." The morning news played quietly in the background, and Nathan glanced up when he heard a familiar name. David Sterling's face appeared on screen as the anchor reported on his company's bankruptcy filing and the federal civil rights charges that had ended his business career and social standing. "Any regrets?" Jasmine asked, noticing his attention to the news. Nathan looked at Hope and Faith, then at Jasmine, then around the room that had become the heart of their unconventional but perfect family. "Only one," he said quietly. Jasmine raised an eyebrow in question. "I regret that it took me 58 years to understand that the best families aren't built on biology or tradition or careful planning. They're built on people choosing to love each other every single day." Hope chose that moment to successfully reach her target present, immediately trying to put the ribbon in her mouth. Faith, not to be outdone, abandoned her wrapping paper investigation and began crawling determinedly toward her sister. Nathan and Jasmine moved simultaneously to redirect the babies towards safer toys, their movements coordinated by months of shared parenting. As they guided the girls toward appropriate Christmas morning activities, Nathan felt the familiar surge of gratitude that had become the dominant emotion in his transformed life. Outside, snow was beginning to fall on Boston, creating the kind of picture-perfect Christmas morning that people spent fortunes trying to create. But inside Nathan's living room, surrounded by baby toys and the chaos of new parenthood, something infinitely more valuable was happening. Two little girls who had been rejected and abandoned were growing up surrounded by love. A young woman who had carried them with courage was building the future she had dreamed of. And a man who had lost his way after losing his wife had found his purpose in choosing to be the father these children needed. Hope babbled something that sounded almost like Dada and reached for Nathan with a complete trust that never failed to humble him. Faith, not to be outdone, made similar sounds while reaching for Jasmine. "Did you hear that?" Jasmine asked, her eyes bright with tears. "I think that was—" "Their first words," Nathan finished, feeling his own eyes well up. "Merry Christmas to us." As he lifted Hope while Jasmine scooped up Faith, Nathan reflected on the journey that had brought them all together. It had started with crisis and rejection, with legal battles and uncertain futures. But it had become something beautiful. A family built on choice rather than chance, love rather than obligation, commitment rather than convenience. David Sterling had been wrong about many things, but he'd been especially wrong about what makes someone a father. Biology was just the beginning. Real fatherhood, real family was built in moments like this, in the daily choices to show up and love unconditionally and protect what mattered most. Hope and Faith would grow up knowing they were wanted and chosen and loved beyond measure. They would understand that family wasn't defined by genetics, but by the people who chose to stay, to fight for you, to make your welfare their highest priority. And Nathan Cross, who had thought his days of making a meaningful difference in the world were behind him, had learned that sometimes the most important work of your life begins when you least expect it, with the simple decision to love someone who needs it most. Outside, the snow continued to fall on Christmas morning in Boston. Inside, a family built on the radical idea that love could transcend every other consideration celebrated their first holiday together, surrounded by the chaos and joy and perfect imperfection of a life chosen rather than inherited. It was exactly the kind of family that couldn't be bought, couldn't be manipulated, and couldn't be broken by people who mistook children for business opportunities. It was, Nathan thought, as he watched Jasmine help Faith unwrap a soft toy while Hope tried to eat the wrapping paper, exactly what family was supposed to be.
Nathan looked at Hope and Faith, who were now both reaching for each other across the small space between them on the blanket. 8 weeks old and already inseparable, already demonstrating the bond that had convinced him from the beginning that they belonged together. "Now we raise them," he said simply. "We love them, we protect them, and we give them everything they need to become amazing women." "Together?" Jasmine asked, and Nathan heard the hope in her voice mixed with uncertainty. "Together," Nathan confirmed. "Whatever that looks like, whatever challenges come up, whatever adjustments we need to make. We're family now. All of us." Rebecca made a soft sound of approval. "You know, Dad, I always wondered if you'd find your way to happiness again after Mom died. I'm glad it came in such an unexpected package." Nathan looked around the room, at his adult daughter holding one of his new daughters, at Jasmine gently tickling Faith's feet, while Hope babbled contentedly nearby, at the toys and baby equipment that had transformed his orderly bachelor existence into something chaotic and wonderful. "You know what the strangest part is?" he said. "David Sterling thought he was taking something from me, but he actually gave me everything I didn't know I needed." 6 months later, Hope and Faith cross Washington. They'd legally hyphenated the names to honor both their chosen parents, celebrated their first Christmas in Nathan's living room, which had been completely reorganized around baby-proofing and comfort. The tree was smaller than Nathan's usual elegant display, covered with baby-safe ornaments and surrounded by enough wrapped presents to supply a small toy store. Jasmine had moved into the guest room permanently 3 months earlier, when juggling 2 households became too complicated with teething babies and demanding nursing school schedules. What had started as a practical arrangement had evolved into something deeper, a true partnership built on shared responsibility and genuine affection. Nathan sat on the floor watching Hope attempt to crawl toward a wrapped present, while Faith contentedly explored the fascinating texture of wrapping paper. At 8 months old, both girls were developing personalities that delighted and amazed him daily. Hope was the adventurer, always trying to reach whatever was just beyond her grasp. Faith was the observer, content to study things carefully before deciding whether they were worth their attention. "They're going to be into everything soon," Jasmine said, settling beside him with 2 cups of coffee. "Are you ready for mobile babies?" "Are parents ever ready for mobile babies?" Nathan asked, accepting the coffee gratefully. "But I figure we'll adapt. We always do." The morning news played quietly in the background, and Nathan glanced up when he heard a familiar name. David Sterling's face appeared on screen as the anchor reported on his company's bankruptcy filing and the federal civil rights charges that had ended his business career and social standing. "Any regrets?" Jasmine asked, noticing his attention to the news. Nathan looked at Hope and Faith, then at Jasmine, then around the room that had become the heart of their unconventional but perfect family. "Only one," he said quietly. Jasmine raised an eyebrow in question. "I regret that it took me 58 years to understand that the best families aren't built on biology or tradition or careful planning. They're built on people choosing to love each other every single day." Hope chose that moment to successfully reach her target present, immediately trying to put the ribbon in her mouth. Faith, not to be outdone, abandoned her wrapping paper investigation and began crawling determinedly toward her sister. Nathan and Jasmine moved simultaneously to redirect the babies toward safer toys, their movements coordinated by months of shared parenting. As they guided the girls toward appropriate Christmas morning activities, Nathan felt the familiar surge of gratitude that had become the dominant emotion in his transformed life. Outside, snow was beginning to fall on Boston, creating the kind of picture-perfect Christmas morning that people spent fortunes trying to create. But inside Nathan's living room, surrounded by baby toys and the chaos of new parenthood, something infinitely more valuable was happening. 2 little girls who had been rejected and abandoned were growing up surrounded by love. A young woman who had carried them with courage was building the future she'd dreamed of, and a man who had lost his way after losing his wife had found his purpose in choosing to be the father these children needed. Hope babbled something that sounded almost like "Dada," and reached for Nathan with the complete trust that never failed to humble him. Faith, not to be outdone, made similar sounds while reaching for Jasmine. "Did you hear that?" Jasmine asked, her eyes bright with tears. "I think that was—" "Their first words," Nathan finished, feeling his own eyes well up. "Merry Christmas to us." As he lifted Hope, while Jasmine scooped up Faith, Nathan reflected on the journey that had brought them all together.
It had started with crisis and rejection, with legal battles and uncertain futures, but it had become something beautiful. A family built on choice rather than chance, love rather than obligation, commitment rather than convenience. David Sterling had been wrong about many things, but he'd been especially wrong about what made someone a father. Biology was just the beginning. Real fatherhood, real family was built in moments like this, in the daily choices to show up and love unconditionally and protect what mattered most. Hope and Faith would grow up knowing they were wanted and chosen and loved beyond measure. They would understand that family wasn't defined by genetics, but by the people who chose to stay, to fight for you, to make your welfare their highest priority. And Nathan Cross, who had thought his days of making a meaningful difference in the world were behind him, had learned that sometimes the most important work of your life begins when you least expect it, with the simple decision to love someone who needs it most. Outside, the snow continued to fall on Christmas morning in Boston. Inside Nathan's living room, surrounded by baby toys and the chaos of new parenthood, a family built on the radical idea that love could transcend every other consideration, celebrated their first holiday together, surrounded by the chaos and joy and perfect imperfection of a life chosen rather than inherited. It was exactly the kind of family that couldn't be bought, couldn't be manipulated, and couldn't be broken by people who mistook children for business opportunities. It was, Nathan thought, as he watched Jasmine help Faith unwrap a soft toy, while Hope tried to eat the wrapping paper. Exactly what family was supposed to be.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.